Good morning, buenos dias. It is nice to see. I see some faces, but we're gonna go ahead and get started today. We have an awesome person, and I think we have a lot of times awesome people, but this individual I've spoken, I think we've had 2 meetings, and every single time that I've been able to hear from her, I've taken more than one item with me, and I am very excited that she's here to talk to everybody. And it's on Zoom, and it's going to be great, and it's going to be fun. Not only does Anne have some sort of very knowledge from us, since most of us were able to do a survey, but she's going to just fill us with knowledge. And please remember, if you have questions, you have the space to make the questions. If you guys have questions in the future, you will have our contact info and we can try to get those answered. With that said, Anne, welcome. This is your space.
Thank you, Caesar. I appreciate that. And I've also learned every time I've met with Caesar, we've just talked about different things and we've shared that learning together. So I'm pleased to be here, and I'm going to go ahead and just start with a little introduction. So I would like to know a little bit about you. So in the chat, if you wouldn't mind sharing your name, where you work, and maybe one thing you enjoy about your job. I'm going to go ahead and start with our session objectives, just because Caesar and I talked a little bit about what would be helpful for your staff. So I do want to recognize the students that you may work with directly or indirectly. What are their goals and what are their needs? Deepen your understanding of the ELP standards, the English language proficiency standards. Not all migrant students are English learners or multilingual learners, but many are. And so we talked about giving you some of that information to help you with knowing what the expectations are for them. We also want to draw connections between the content standards and then the ELP standards and our language demands. And so you can make some connections if you work in a classroom setting or if you support students after school, and academically if you want to know some ways that you can support them. And I just wanted to also reinforce some good instructional supports that you can use, or you can also share with your teachers that you're working with, or whatever your setting would be. So those are our session objectives. And I'm going to have you just think a little bit for yourself. We did do a survey, and so I have some results of that as we go through, but I just want you to think about something that you want to take away at the end of our time together. So if you have a sticky note beside you, or you just can put it in your mind, what's something you want to take away when we're finished in this hour together? And as you kind of thought, I'm going to move forward. We're going to come back to these objectives. But the first one is really recognizing student goals and student needs. How can you do that? This is just an example of something we use with our English learners. The ELPA summative assessment is the English language proficiency assessment that is given every February to every student who is receiving services in English learning programs. And so we can gather the data of how they're performing, and I'll tell you a little bit about those reports, but basically we have scores of 1 all the way up to 5. 1, as you imagine, would be emerging or just beginning. 2s and 3s are progressing. 4s and 5s are meeting proficiency. And we do all 4 domains: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And then they have an overall composite score. So gathering that information over years gives you a picture of hopefully how they're growing and what areas they seem to be doing well and what areas they might need additional support and needs. So this would be a way to review their assessment data, and you could look at the state level assessments, district level assessments, school level, and any screeners that were given maybe at the beginning. So there's lots of ways to gather their learning information, but also to think about some things that they might be really good at. And so sometimes we don't see that in the classroom, but we might see it outside on the playground or in the sports, and we know that they're just very athletic and everybody wants them on their team. Or we may know that they're just very friendly and everyone wants to talk with them, and they just offer so many kind, nice kinds of things with other friends. Or maybe they're hard workers and they come in and they support the teacher and they do whatever they need to do. They always want to clean up or they always want to do something. So whatever kind of strengths you could review and just kind of acknowledge and give them that affirmation, that would be very helpful. But then what are some areas that maybe are things that they want to work on and improve? And from the English learner perspective, many of them are working on their language. They want to improve their English language skills. If you have students who maybe aren't English learners, they may have other academic goals. They may want to do well in their reading assessments, or they may want to improve in a certain subject area that might be hard for them. So as you think about areas to work on, that can then help you to set some goals. And we have some examples here of goals. Students might want to improve in writing, and they might want to improve from a score of a 2 to a 3 in this school year. And they might want to think about how they're going to do that in action steps. We know that the best way to improve in something is to practice. The more opportunities you have to actually engage in the activity, the better you probably will get at it. Sometimes you need specific coaching, or sometimes you need specific instruction, or sometimes you need a little extra help to get there. But this is where you could think of some action steps. So thinking of a student that you might know in a setting that you might be in, can you think of maybe what you know about them already, what you'd want to find more information out, and then how you might help them set a goal? Because we all know I can set a goal for all these students, but that's not going to matter. It really matters what they want to set for their goal. And so you can just help facilitate and guide that to help them recognize where they could really spend some time and then see some results. So that's just a little something to talk about as far as thinking as, what are some things that students could be working on? Now, I'm curious, since I work with English learners, all students, all people, anyone learning a language that's maybe not their first language, go through these steps, these stages of acquisition. They may go at them at different rates because we all have different personalities. Sometimes students might be very outgoing or very shy, and that could impact how quickly they stay in a stage or progress through the stage. Their background, experiences, their family, all of these things contribute to what things they have in their background. But every single student, every single person learning a language that's not their first language goes through these 5 steps. Pre-production. Think of a child that's maybe 2 or under. Before they can put together any words, you might be able to tell them, go pick up your shoes. And that little child will go over and pick up their shoes. They can't say, I'm going to go pick up my shoes, but they do it because they are listening and comprehending. Students at any age, people at any age learning a language will start to acquire information in that language. They will understand before they can ever use any of the language in their speaking or writing. So pre-production is when it starts to come into their mind and they're starting to comprehend, but they're not talking yet. Early production is single words or very short phrases. Yes, no, okay, hello. All of these things are their first initial tries to start the language. So early production, over here, there's the stages as well. And you can think about the characteristics and how long it takes. But as a teacher or a person working with them, what are some things you can do to facilitate where they are, but then also support them and help them go to the next stage? After early production is speech emergent, and speech emergent is more longer sentences. They still might be simple sentences. There still may be grammatical errors, but those are things that they're starting to put together. And then intermediate and then advanced, those students are starting to make less grammatical errors. They have really good comprehension, their understanding, but they're still working on that academic language. So these are some things that you can see to help if a student is at these stages. So if a student's at pre-production and they're maybe an older student and you want to kind of see what they know, you could ask them to show you on a paper. You could ask them to draw a picture. You could ask them to point to, and different things that they could do, but they don't have to have any language to do that. You just can understand that they know what you're talking about. So these are just some examples of things that can be done at various stages of language acquisition. I want to show you how this relates to the ELPA 21 ISR, or individual student reports. These come every May after the students have taken the assessment in February. And this is just a demo example that tells you their overall proficiency status. This particular student is progressing, their overall scale score, their comprehension scale score, and then it does compare to the state, to the district, and to the school, how the student might have performed. But this is really where you get some good information. As I said, a 1 is just your emerging or beginning. 2s and 3s are progressing. 4s and 5s are proficient. This student is proficient in speaking and listening, progressing in reading and writing. And some of these domain descriptions help you know what they can do at that stage, what they're able to do right now in that area. And then those are some ideas of what you could do to help them with. So that's a little bit bigger, you can kind of see. I wouldn't focus on the 4s and 5s because they're already proficient, but I would start to hone in on their reading and their writing and what kinds of things they are able to do, and then what are the things that they should be able to do to meet proficiency at 4. So you could look at those and you could start to get some ideas to help them. All right, so I'm going to ask you to do a little breakout. I want you to think about the things we've just talked about. Assessing what the student is good at, and what the student may need to continue to work on. I mentioned mostly language, but you may have students that are not language learners, and there may be other things that you could draw from. So I'm going to go up and I was going to give you guys about 3 minutes in a breakout room so you could kind of share with each other how you might use this information in your setting and how you might be able to, let me make sure I've got enough, how you might be able to work with the students that you know. So does anybody have any questions? As you're coming in, I'm just go ahead and open those breakout rooms so you can have a little conversation about goals and needs. Welcome back, everybody. Yeah, perfect. I hope you had enough time to discuss. It's always that gamble, but we'll have some more time. So I'm hopeful that you'll be able to think about some of your students and what some of their goals and needs are. But we're going to move now to thinking more a little specifically about a student. And I'm going to have you go ahead and just in your own mind, think about who your student is. So one student I know might have goals to, and what would those goals be? Or I know this student, a student's name, and one goal or need would be. And I just want you to think in your own mind. And then we're going to do what's called a 1, 2, 3, and everybody kind of writes at the same time and then presses return at the same time. So then we've got them all coming in the chat. So I'm going to give you some time to think. You've got a frame here, a sentence frame that is something that we use with our English learners to give support. But you had some time to think about how you might use those resources. Now I really want you to think about a specific student that you may know. Could be your own child. It could be someone that you work with every day. It could be someone that you have only met once or twice. But I want you to think about a student that you might be able to help or what their goals might be. Very good. Thank you for all sharing some of your students. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about how do we help the students reach these goals, right? So learning English, reading and writing English, speaking English, graduating, earning a GED, having career aspirations, all of those good things. So our first session objective was just to really recognize our student goals and needs. Do you think we've accomplished that? Have we talked through some ideas? You've identified some. Very good. Now we're going to deepen your understanding of the English language proficiency standards. I did a survey, and thank you to those of you that participated. This gives me a good understanding of where your background is. As you can see, 7 would be, I know these, I could teach them to the group. 1 is, I don't have any experience with these. I've never heard of them. I don't really know anything about them. So we've got kind of a range. A 5 would be, no, I'm not ready to teach them, but at least I've heard of them. I feel a little more comfortable about them. And 1s and 2s, I don't know anything about these. So that gives me some, at least not everybody's a 7. If everybody's a 7, I would just pass this part and say, we don't need to do it. But because of your survey, it tells me that we're going to spend a little time and I'm going to help you understand. And we're going to see if we can take you from 1 to 2, or from 2 to 3, or from 3 to 4, or 5 to 6, so we can all move over a little bit more in our understanding of the ELP standards. So there are 10. These are them. The 10 standards are the same standard for grades K through 12, and they relate to content for standards 1 through 7, and they're more the linguistic features 8, 9, and 10. So I'm just going to tell you, these are the overall standards. Now, when you get into kindergarten, first grade, they're going to look a little different with their descriptors than when you're in 12th grade. So there's differences for the ages, but there's also differences for the level of proficiency. So a level 1 has different expectations than a level 3 or level 4. As you move up on that, remember your stages of language acquisition. So I'm going to just show you, we've done some quick reference. This is kind of a lot to read, but the very first one, construct meaning. If you can just remember, construct meaning from oral presentations, from videos, from reading, from listening to others. Construct meaning. Pull in, understand what you're being told. That's basically the standard. Do you think students need this in every single class? Do they need to understand what's going on around them? I would agree, yes. They would need this in ELA, in mathematics, in their science class, in social studies, in PE, in music, in CTE. Every class, they need to understand what's going on around them. Number 2, participate in grade-appropriate exchanges of information. They have to listen, they have to respond. They read, they have to write. Exchanges of information is when they have to hear something and be able to respond to it. Questions, they have to answer, right? If someone asks them something, they respond. What do you think about this idea? Well, I think we should. Exchanges of information. Is this something that happens in ELA, science, math, social studies? Yeah, they have to exchange information. Number 3, speak and write about grade appropriate text and topics. Speak and write. Do they have to do this in math, science, social studies, ELA? Yeah, they have to either tell what they learned about the topic or write what they did. Many times it's both, right? Number 4, construct grade appropriate oral and written claims with support and reasoning. Construct claims. They have to be able to state their opinion or their claim, provide their reason, and maybe an evidence. Sometimes it's called text-dependent analysis, where they have to read a text, they answer a question, or they state something, provide evidence of why they think that. This relates to ELA, mathematics, science, social studies. In those classes, they have to be able to construct claims and then provide reasoning and evidence. Number 5 is conduct research. evaluate and communicate their findings. Do they do that? ELA, math, science, yes. Research at kindergarten level can be answering questions about a topic, finding answers to questions that they want to learn. That's research. And then evaluating, is this a good answer? And then communicating the results. Number 6 is analyzing and critiquing the arguments of others. So I think there's a couple people in the waiting. There we go. You got them, Caesar? But analyzing, critiquing the arguments of others. So if they're in a classroom and someone says, I think we should do this, and they have to listen and say, well, I agree or I disagree because, or they go on a website and they have to analyze, is this a website that gives me credible information? How old is this website? Who's producing this website? Do they want money? Are they trying to do? Everyone has to do these things in ELA, in math, in science, in social studies. And then 7, the last one that connects to our content, adapt language choices. And I always think about, I was walking down the hallway with a student a number of years ago, and we were in the hallway and he was just talking to me as he would talk to someone on the playground, but he used a cuss word, an English cuss word that he was brand new, level 1, didn't know much. And so I had to talk with him about, when you speak to a teacher, you don't use that word. Here's another word that you could use that would mean, but when you're on the playground, you hear that word. That's social. You might be using that. I would still encourage you not to use. But when you're talking to friends, you're going to use some language. When you're talking to your parents, you might use a different language. When you're talking to an adult or you're going to a business person, you might use different language. So these are all standards that revolve around the content-specific practices. The last 3 are really more linguistic. Number 8, determine the meaning of words and phrases. Vocabulary, understanding what words and phrases mean. Number 9, create clear and coherent speech and text. This is really knowing what to say and how to say it. Organized, being able to have a good, clear sentence or a good, clear paragraph or a good, clear paper. And then number 10, making accurate use of standard English grammar. Understanding when the verbs agree, how to have the plurals or the singulars, all of those things that are a part of our grammar. So these are the 10 ELP standards in a nutshell. We did this quick reference title to help us with more understanding. What is it that they're really asking of the students? We do have modalities. Remember how we talked about the domains of listening and reading, speaking and writing? Well, the modalities are if they're receptive in nature or productive or interactive. So a receptive is going to be your listening and reading. When you bring something in, either you hear it, you see it, and you read it. You are understanding. So number 1, construct meaning. Number 8, determine the meanings of words and phrases. These all focus on receptive language. Productive, speaking and writing. So number 3, speak and write about grade appropriate topics. Number 4, construct claims. Number 7, adapt your language choice based on your setting or your task. These are all with speaking and writing, the productive modality. And then interactive, all 4. Exchanging in information, you have to listen, you might read, you're going to speak, and you might even write. So there's exchanging information is all 4. Conducting research, generate a question, read or speak to others and listen to what they say, speak, talk about it, and write or produce something that you share. And analyzing and critiquing the arguments of others, again, listening or reading, speaking, and then writing. So all 4 domains are involved in interactive. I'm going to show you that there are differences according to their stage of language production. Remember, we talked about the stages. Well, at level 1, we are not expecting a lot of language. they're just emerging. We are looking for them to have simple information, simple sentence structures. We will produce those, some phrases, and maybe a small limited range of vocabulary. Again, it can be academic vocabulary, but it's going to be more common academic vocabulary because you're really working on building that base. As you move through the levels, the level of language also increases. So you get more vocabulary, more academic language. Sentences start to become a little more compound. So you've got two simple sentences. I like to run and I like to walk. Two simple sentences joined by a conjunction. So you've got a compound sentence. So as students get more language, they're able to produce more. They've got more vocabulary to choose from, and they've got more ways to say it. So you're helping them with how to say certain sentences. When you get to 3, now we're working into more productive language of paragraphs. So if you're able to produce sentences, you've got some good vocabulary, you want to keep working on that. Now you're going to have a better idea. You want to produce more language, paragraphs with a topic sentence, all your details in a concluding sentence that are more around an idea, and more complex language, developing vocabulary of your academic, wherever you are on the grade. So if you're in a kindergarten, first grade, you're doing what your peers are doing with that academic language. If you're in the higher grades, 9th through 12th grade, again, you're trying to be exposed to that higher academic language, those more sophisticated sentence structures. And then 4s or 5s are where we're seeing proficiency. And I would argue that native English speakers also need explicit support with academic language. We don't speak that way normally, right? In the playground, on the outside in the streets, when you're talking with your friends. So when you use some of these kinds of strategies to support them in developing that academic language, you're not hurting anyone. You're supporting all students, because all students then are practicing the academic language that will help them be successful. So that's just a little bit about the word level, the sentence level, and then the discourse. The discourse is longer passages. Like when you're in a science classroom, that discourse is very different than if you're in a math classroom. So science, you might have a hypothesis and you might have some guesses that you're trying to do, but then you're going to experiment and then you're going to provide your reasoning and your support. Math, you may have a problem and a solution, right? So you may be talking about the problem is, I think the solution is, I found that because. So there are different ways that you use the language in different settings. And that's just something we try to help our English learners with. Comparing the ELP standards to your content standards, this was your survey results that you guys gave back to me. A little more knowledge about the content standards. You're probably in those classes. You're probably seeing what the teachers are asking them to do. One of the things that we're doing is we're looking at practices, not the little tiny standard, that might be standard 1.3.2, as they get into real specifics, but what's the overall practice of the standard? So for ELA, they really need to be reading complex text and they need to be analyzing them. That's a practice in ELA for all grades. They're going to do it at grade appropriate. Do we do anything like that in ELP? Yeah, we construct meaning. We want them exchanging information with their peers. We want them speaking and writing. Here's a research one, and here's understanding the means of words and phrases. So up here, these numbers are our ELP standards. They relate to the content area standards practices. So if you're in an ELA classroom and they're doing some things, reading, writing, they're speaking, they're doing research, you can know there are connections with the ELP standards. We try to help our teachers. It's not something you have to do extra. It's you're already doing it, but you're going to provide now the support for the language part. So when they're constructing meaning, are you providing visuals? Are you making it so they can comprehend what they're reading? Are you breaking it down? So maybe you're chunking it. Do you have a graphic organizer that you can support? And guess what? You're supporting the students with their ELP standard, and you're supporting your students with the ELA practice because you're helping build their level of understanding, right? So these are some things that we like to make connections. So now what I'm going to ask you guys to do is I'm going to put you in a breakout room for a couple of minutes. I want you to think about what you've seen in a classroom setting or where you were, and make a connection with the ELP standards, the 10 standards. And I can go back. If I go back here, these are the 10 ELP standards. If you have this presentation, you can look at those and try to make some connections. You could also look at this one and see some connections. And I just want you to have a little conversation in your breakout room of the two areas. How do they really come together? How do they mesh? So I'm going to go ahead and open the breakout rooms and let you guys have some conversation. Well, I think we'll be okay. I hope you guys had a little bit of time. Does anyone want to come off mute or put in chat a connection? Did you talk about a standard that you've observed in a lesson or that you've seen, a practice that they've done, and how that relates to the ELP? Either you can take yourself off mute or put it in the chat. And we'll let you kind of share either what you said or what someone else in your breakout room said.
I'll share, Anne.
Yes.
Racha and Josh and I, three of us were in a group, and we didn't really get to the standards, but we did talk about, well, I should say Racha is very familiar. She's in classrooms in Lincoln Public Schools, so she's familiar to the standards, really more guided for her because the teacher is definitely implementing those. And Josh mentioned about, being an advocate, and there was a school district, they've received their first EL student in the last few years. And so I said, you be sure and get Anne's contact information. No doubt she'll be able to help the school. So that's as far as we got.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And of course, Josh, yes, reach out. I was going to say the one that I always go to, and most people go to, is number 8 of our ELP standards, which is vocabulary. Every single classroom, when students are learning a new unit, there are some new vocabulary terms. They're new for all kids. And so if we can think about some ideas of how we can help our students with that, that would be a good connection that you might be able to make. But what I'm going to do is I'm looking at our time, and I want to get through a couple more things. I want to draw some connections and really enforce some instructional strategies. So you guys shared some good things that you're seeing in the classroom on the survey. Using visual representations. Yes, I loved this one. Color coding notes and explicitly teaching the vocabulary and the steps to students. I've seen that. So if a student is at emerging level 1, and in the same class, there's another student that's level 2 or 3. And the same class, there's a student who's level 4, proficient. Color coding a page of text that they're supposed to read. So the student who's at emerging level 1, they maybe only read the yellow highlighted. They get the idea of the text, but they only have to read maybe two or 3 sentences. The students that may be level 2 and 3, maybe they have an orange highlight and they read the yellow and the orange, so they're increasing their amount of text that they're reading. So color coding can be done in a number of different ways, but I love that strategy. Teaching material at a lower pace and using guided practice to complete problems. So giving them some time and doing them maybe in guided practice. Checking understanding, formative checks, little checklists, or doing, I used to have a stoplight on the student's desk, red, yellow, green, and it was a pinch card. And so I would have students pinch their card on whatever area if we were doing vocabulary. And I would say, okay, everyone, this is the new vocabulary. Let me know. Are you green? You know it. Yellow, I've heard it. I don't really know. Red, I've never heard it before. I don't know what this word is. And a quick look of the room, I could tell we need to spend some time on this, or these two, they need some more support, but everybody else is good. So I'm going to plan my thing that way. So getting a good sense of what your students know and where they are to guide your lessons. And then pairing explicit instruction with scaffolding, learning vocabulary progressively, explicit instruction. And I love this sentence. It will strengthen the vocabulary skills of the native English speakers as well. It's good for all. Yes. And someone shared that they've seen EL Achieve, which is an excellent resource that a lot of people use to support their English learners. So thank you for those that shared on the survey, some good strategies that you've seen. Now I'm going to have you watch a lesson. I don't think anyone in here speaks Farsi. Am I right? Or does anyone here speak Farsi? Okay, so this is going to be, you're going to be in a classroom and you're going to be listening to the teacher. And I want to see how much you can pull away from this lesson in Farsi. And I've got the sound on. I'm going to double check that because that's always the thing. I'm going to make sure that my sound is on, yes. And I want to make sure that you guys can hear it. So let's make sure I'm loud enough. Okay, and here we go. It's just a couple minutes.
یکی بود یکی نبود غیر از خدا هیچ کس نبود توی شهر دور یک پنگوئن بود و یک اردک پنگوئن فقط دوست داشت کلا بخوره غذاشم فقط شکلات بود و آب نبات و چیپس همیشه سرش درد میکرد همیشه دلش درد میکرد توی مدرسم هیچ شاگرد خوبی نبود و درس نمیتونست بخونه در عوض اردک فقط آب پرتقال میخورد سیب دوست داشت بخوره گلابی میخورد گندم میخورد و نون رو دوست داشت بخوره خیلی ورزش میکرد میدوید حالش خوب بود توی مدرسم خیلی شاگرد خوبی بود
So that's that lesson. Can you tell me what that lesson was about? Do you have any idea what you would be learning? Think about being in that classroom day after day after day. Wah, 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 wah. Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. Same lesson. Listen and watch.
Now I'm going to present to you the same lesson in a different manner. یکی بود یکی نبود غیر از خدا هیچ کس نبود توی یک شهر دور یک پنگوئن بود و یک اردک پنگوئن فقط دوست داشت کلا بخوره غذاشم فقط شکلات بود و آب نبات و چیپس پنگوئن همیشه خسته بود سرش درد میکرد دلش درد میکرد توی مدرسه هیچ شاگرد خوبی نبود وقتی که میشست مدادش رو دست میگرفت ولی بعد از 2 دقیقه دهن دره میکرد میگفت سرم درد میکنه سرش رو میگذاشت روی کتاب و میگفت بهتره چرت بزنم در عوض اردک همیشه آب پرتقال میخورد سیب رو خیلی دوست داشت بخوره گلابی میخورد نون خوب میخورد گندم میخورد همیشه حالش خوب بود ورزش میکرد میدوید هیچ وقتم مریض نمیشد توی مدرسه هم شاگرد خیلی خوبی بود مدادش رو دست میگرفت تند و تند درسش رو میخوند و مینوشت همیشه توی مدرسه نمره های خیلی خوب داشت شاگردام همیشه براش دست میزدن
All right, what's that lesson about? Do you have the idea? Did you understand what the lesson was? We still don't know all of Farsi, although I bet you heard some cognates. And cognates are those words in a language that match your language. So in English, chips, cola, penguin, duck, right? So you heard some things. What kinds of things did she do to make that lesson more comprehensible?
Now I'm going to
I want to do that. We want to go to the next one. Look at some of the strategies that were used. She had visuals. She had the actual items, which are called realia. She used cognates, and she emphasized those when she used them. So the first time did you hear them? You might have missed them, right? Because it was just womp, 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 womp. But you heard them the second time. She emphasized them. She had the object. She used some gestures, didn't she? Oh, my stomach doesn't feel good. I'm not, or I'm, feeling, tired. She had all sorts of different kinds of things. So she was demonstrating, pointing to information. So think about some of those things. What would happen to your language if you were in that classroom day after day after day? You would start to acquire the language because the message was comprehensible. You understood. She did a compare and contrast. She used higher order thinking, and your brain went there. Oh yeah, if you drink cola and you eat chips, you're not going to feel good. You're not going to be very healthy. If you eat, the healthy foods, you're going to feel more. So she did the compare and contrast, and your brain was able to comprehend. And so you picked up some of the words. She could continue to explicitly teach that new vocabulary. She could have had word banks posted. She could have had some opportunities for you to turn and talk and practice that language with each other, right? So these are all strategies that we use to support our English learners. And I just wanted you to see that there are some principles that we keep in mind when we're working with students who are acquiring a language other than their first language. So they're in a setting, they're acquiring English, they may speak 2 or 3 other languages, but we are going to focus on the academic language. That's going to benefit all students. Link background knowledge and culture to the learning. Make those connections so students are able to see that. This one we're going to really focus on. Increase comprehensible input, what you just saw, and opportunities for output, opportunities to use the language. And you can do that by promoting classroom interaction, small groups, turn and talk, everyone gets a chance. And think about that higher order thinking and the use of learning strategies. But I really wanted you to see that video that we just pulled out, comprehensible input. When students understand the message, they will acquire the language. When students get the opportunity to interact with the language, they get to produce it, they get to hear it. They're doing interactive, they will acquire the language. All right, so I want you just to have a quick little reflection about your own context. Where are you? What are you doing? Think of a strategy or two that fits right in. You could do it this afternoon. You could do it tomorrow. You could share it with a teacher and you could use it in the classroom, or you might work individually with a student. So I'm going to have you just think. And then I'm going to let you either type in chat or come off mute and share. If anybody wants to share an idea of something you could use in your setting. Any ideas on chat?
Hi, and this is Marnie from Lexington.
Yes.
So kind of putting together some of the pieces, I was thinking how powerful it would be to have students maybe look at their own data from ELPA and set goals and kind of tie in their level of understanding on the ELPA with where they want to be and how we can get there, and use some of those strategies to to work on that ELA standards as well.
Yes, I love it. Taking their own data and maybe making charts or making some kind of, a bar graph or something, because they have to read bar graphs when they're taking the ELPA. And so I think that that's a wonderful idea. It helps them know where they were, and then they can set realistic goals of where they want to be. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
I'm going to go off of what Marnie just said. And last year, I remember working with Columbus, we even brought parents in to set goals for in preparation for ELPA. So we took their scores from the previous 2 years, and we walked parents through the information, sharing with them the information that their students have scored the 2 previous years. And we also, part of our presentation was providing examples of questions that are in ELPA. So we had, I remember one of them was like comparing and contrast. So we had, at the time, I remember, we did 2 musical artists. And the parents knew who these musical artists were. And so as they came up with details and comparing and contrasting these 2 artists, like, it was deep. And it was so interesting to provide them with examples of what the students are seeing on ELPA, because many times parents think, well, my student does know English. Why is he still taking this test? Well, yeah, they might know the conversational English, but they don't have that academic piece completely nailed yet. And this is what they're missing. And it was, getting, opening their eyes to understanding that what we're looking for is the academic English whenever we want them to pass these tests. Another thing that we're working on, students do not have school this Friday. So we will be doing a writing and literature camp with our high school and middle school students here in Columbus. We're also working on, there's 4 activities that we're having them do. And let me see, one of them also has to do with, so we did the compare and contrast. We're also doing writing, like, what is it called? Procedural writing. Having students walk through the steps, because I think also on the ELPA, one of the things that it's asking them to do, so they watch a video, and after having watched the video, then they have to re-explain the steps to a certain task. And so it's allowing the students, or giving the students, the tools they need to get through sections like that.
Those are awesome, Vanessa. Thank you for sharing. And I wanted to let everyone know there are practice tests for the ELPA practice tasks that kind of do some of these similar things that are going to be on the ELPA, so students get the opportunity to see it. I love it that you did with parents, and then you connected to their background knowledge, but then you also help them understand what the expectation is for their level of language on the ELPA. Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you for sharing. I'm looking at the time and I don't want to go over, but I do appreciate all of your sharing. I want to come back. Remember, I asked you to kind of think about the objectives. We recognize students' goals and needs. We deepen our own understanding of the ELP standards, but then we also can draw connections between the content standards and the ELP standards. It's not something additional. It's something they're already doing. We're just more explicit with the language. And then thinking of some of those awesome instructional supports that you guys already know, many of them you already have. So how did we do on our objectives today? Did we do okay? And I wanted to give you the opportunity, if you have additional questions, I don't want to keep you longer because I know the time, you can always email me. I have my email here. You can go through Caesar, you can ask him, or Sue, Henry, we work together. So whatever would be helpful for you, just let me know and we can move from there. So I'm going to go ahead and say thank you so much. And I'll open it up. If anybody wants any questions, I'm happy to stay on, but I also value your time and I thank you so much for giving an hour of your time.